Today on our Tech for Business podcast, we're joined by Todd, our COO and CISO, and Nate, our Director of Cybersecurity, to talk about what's coming in 2026 and how to level up your security. So Todd, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about preparing or leveling up your security in 2026?
Great question. And like you said, when you say first thing that pops into my mind, it's a whole bunch of things simultaneous. But I'll start with where I think the core is. There's a lot of stuff that I'll preface this first comment with. There are things that I think are probably easier to implement, so they'll probably take priority. But the most important place where I think it's critical to talk about, and if you've listened to our podcast, this won't be the first time I've said it, but I think it's time to start to get your arms around what the future of your architecture looks like, which to me starts with, ultimately we're going for zero trust, but it ultimately starts with your identity tool set. And what that looks like today for most organizations is Microsoft Active Directory. There is an end of life for Microsoft Active Directory. It is tied to the current version of Windows. I forget, we're on 2025. And they're currently saying that's roughly around 2030. And now that sounds like it's a really long ways out and you can kick the can on it. And it probably will go into extended life. But from my perspective, if you're starting to get moving on this, now is a good time to figure out what that looks like. So kind of an example, Nate and I have been chatting about what identities look like for years at CIT. We started down the path on our solution set probably 9 years ago, but didn't really start to implement it until about, I would guess, 5-ish, 6 years ago. And it took about that much time to get completely off of Active Directory to where we want it to be. So when I say 30 sounds like a really long ways away, if you think about it in the context of how long it takes to make that transition, the timing is right. And again, to me, it's the core of setting yourself up for success in the future. And again, just to kind of get a little bit more detail why I'm saying this is because if you look at the identity, historically, Active Directory was designed to be inside your four walls, if you will, regardless of how many walls you have in the building. And assuming that everybody's in the office, and that really is not the case anymore. Not everybody's in the office. You got remote locations, you got people working remotely, you've got a bunch of cloud apps, et cetera. And that technology really was not designed to scale with what the future looks like. So that's where I'd start.
Yeah, the identity, if you've listened to any of those podcasts in the past, you'll quickly learn that identity is one of my big passions of cybersecurity because it's ultimately one of those tools that is, I always try and find the balance of something that makes the organization more secure, but also produces a better experience for the end user as well, right? Is those types of things are hard to find in security. And so when, identity is really powerful, and I'll take this from my own, former employee, but it taught me a lot, was identity is the intersection between IT, HR, and security, right? It's a very critical business function. And to Todd's point is Active Directory is, kind of built on, the legacy mindset, right? The Windows NT Active Directory days, right? Novell and not NT, Novell and then Active Directory and everything. So these are old technologies. They're still used, quite widely, but the modern day, IT infrastructure is going to be heavily cloud-based. We've seen that for years. We have customers moving to the cloud, but what that means is that rather than scripting and everything like that, it's going to be API driven. So allowing these cloud technologies to talk to each other. And so everything is going to be interconnected and automated, right? And so one of the big, initiatives that we help organizations with is, when we talk about like identity maturity is up at the upper echelons of it, you can get all the way from like HR driven hiring, right? So the moment that HR puts an employee in your HRIS, it will sync downstream to your identity platform, provide all the proper access controls, push it downstream, go create all the access within the different applications that you may have integrated there. And then lastly, and probably more importantly, is the user termination of it. Is let's say there is a immediate cause for termination and you are concerned about insider threat or, as they transition out, maybe you can't shut down applications fast enough. If it's all tied to HR, they can terminate, and within seconds, all your other applications are terminated as well. So really, your identity platform is that consolidated point for access to all your applications. You control one password, or in the CIT's case, we don't even have passwords anymore, but that's the stuff that's capable. So I think kind of the last thing I'd probably state about this is many organizations, even if you're not getting to that full upper echelon of full automation, I think one of the big things that organizations need to start taking a look at in 2026 is oftentimes we've seen organizations have upgraded from, I'll pick on Microsoft, is kind of their business standard, business basic licensing, and they've gone up to business premium. Oftentimes what they don't understand is that comes with all the licensing capable of single sign-on and user provisioning and everything like that. Microsoft has done a lot in the last year or two to really robust that offering. So now what that means is that your employees only have to log in once to be able to access their other applications. So your employees can be more efficient with their logins. You don't have people getting locked out of separate systems. If you want to, again, terminate or hire, you have far quicker access. And I don't know if many organizations know that exists. So I would say I'll pick on Microsoft because that's where most people will land. If that's ultimately where the future of your identity lands, if you moved away from Active Directory, is start thinking about all the cloud applications you have that you want to start integrating into that single login. We can help. I'm clearly passionate about it. We got a team to do it. So selfish plug.
One other thing I wanted to throw on here, just because I think it's incredibly important, is when we're talking a lot of context around identity, we often talk about it as the human. And as we're talking about the future and really securing your network, one thing I think is incredibly important to talk about, and I'm certain we'll get into this a bit more as we're talking through it, is what's referred to as the non-human IDs. And what that is those are going to be your APIs, your agentic AI, those types of things. They're going to start to become very prevalent in the architecture of almost every organization. And knowing that's true, again, getting your arms around that. How do I manage it? What does it look like going forward? And the stuff that Nate's touching on, which is all of the automations that you can build into it, is going to be a big deal. So again, zero trust is the overarching wrapper that I'm throwing around this, but ID, I think, is by far one of the biggest things that people probably haven't thought about, just because it's, we've done it this way for 30 years. We'll just keep on doing it. That's not true. We really need to re-wrench what it looks like.
Yeah, I definitely want to continue the conversation around like what's coming for 2026. Last week, we talked about these tech trends and how many new things are coming out. Do you think all of these new tools, all of this new AI, is it going to make it harder as a security team to make sure that you're staying up to date, or is it going to make it easier? Todd?
Both, I think. I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is it'll be more complicated, but it will. I mean, the way cybersecurity is the threats are increasing at an alarming rate. They just are. They're trying to get in front of the security teams as fast as they possibly can. And then we've talked about the motivation. It's money, right? And so they're going as hard and fast as they possibly can to make it more complicated for us to defend. But on the flip side, there will be a lot of tools and features that are coming out that will help defenders as well, right? So I'll just use an example of, just using AI as a little small piece of what I'm referring to is AI will be part of what's traditionally been a manual SOC process, Security Operations Center. A lot of that first layer stuff can be handled by agentic work. And so that is stuff that will quickly make it faster to respond and dig into deeper and getting much deeper insights much faster. So I think it will find things. I mean, Nate touched on identity as a great example. There's so much stuff that will get easier. I'll use, and again, I'm certain we'll expand on this too, is we've transitioned at CIT to zero trust network access. And what it looks like from our end users, the traditional stuff that we used to build, and this comes to mind because we just rewrote our policy the other day, and I was looking through it and we had references to our old VPN connectivity. I was like, well, rip that out because we don't have to worry about that anymore. But that old way of doing business, going through VPN was kind of a manual process. It wasn't the greatest experience, et cetera. Zero trust network access simplifies the end user's experience so much. The single sign-on stuff simplifies user interactions, provides significantly better security, et cetera. So I know I kind of got to play both sides of the fence there, but I think it really truly is both.
Yeah, I think to Todd's point, they're just different risks but they're new risks, so they're unknown, right? So my my immediate response is, does this make it more difficult? Was hell yeah. Right. But it's just the matter of learning, right? Is like we've known that AI was coming, but it's the speed at which it operates. But I think more importantly is that the tools for the governance of it simultaneously being built, right? So no one is really the expert at it to a degree, right? I know many of our customers, you might come to us and say, how do I do proper AI governance over our environments, right? And I'll just pick on Microsoft Purview, for example. Many people haven't even heard of Purview, but it's Microsoft's basically data governance platform. And if you go into Purview today, it's different than it was last week, and it's different than it was the month before, and there's different, items from the quarter before. So, we are constantly trying to even stay up to date on the latest changes, but you take that into every other platform out there, right? I have customers coming to us saying, I just got off a call before this podcast going, hey, tell me everything you know about Adobe's AI usage, right, in their creative suite. So I actually have a follow-up that I need to go do with Ariel right after this, right? But and we have new AI tools popping up left and right, and customers wanting to talk about due diligence. It's just so rapidly evolving. It's setting the baselines of how to even approach it in the first place, to put some type of standard process into the vendor due diligence and the risk assessment of controlling what's it going to access, how is it going to be used, how is it going to be processed or transmitted, especially with agentic AI usage. Getting to Todd's point of the non-human identities working with this, is I could tell Ariel, don't use customer data in some public resource. But if you stick an AI usage, your AI tool, and you never told it not to do it, can you blame it, right?
Again, hearkening back to last week, Nate had brought up an example of privacy that became a concern, and prior to him even bringing it up, it wasn't even on my radar. I don't think that way. And so just to kind of get into it, it was using images and how those images could be, AI can now mess with those images and get into things that are illicit, to put it mildly. And my brain doesn't think that way. So I don't go, how do I protect against that? What does that look like? How do I put the guide rails in place that's something I even have to worry about? So when Nate gets into the unknown unknowns, it wasn't even on my radar. Why would I worry about something I don't know about, right? It is interesting, though. I mean, I picked this up from a book, so I'm not going to put a trademark on it, and you probably can't either. But as you're listening to this, one of the things that I think is really interesting is people work with us because of our vision and as well as our expertise. But Nate nailed it. This is so new and it's evolving so quickly. I don't think anybody can really say I'm the expert and I know this inside and out. But the speed at which you pick that information up and you have the ability to disseminate it and put it into action is something that's incredibly critical. So while we may not have the expertise today, we might tomorrow. So just kind of going down that path, I don't want to put too much fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the world. But it is moving incredibly quickly, but so are we.
Yeah, there's a lot coming. There's a lot of podcasts. We're going to be talking about this over and over. Something that came up last time as well, we talked a little bit about legislation and compliance. I mean, how are those big picture things going to change a director of cybersecurity's focus for that year? I mean, how is that going to change what you really need to be paying attention to?
Yeah.
I'm not the director, so I'll let Nate go.
Now that I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I think one of the big things with the upcoming tooling and AI and everything is the data governance. It is really critical. So early on in my security career, I remember talking to a security executive, and when newer security individual just wants to talk tools, right? These are the cool part of cybersecurity, and they did a really good job saying, the core focus of cybersecurity is the data, right? And you can go look at zero trust, models of this, and they've broken it out. But, we always say security is like an onion, but at the center of it, what are we actually trying to protect? It's the data. It's because the data holds value. It's the trade secrets, the intellectual property, the health records, the personally identifiable information. And if that data is taken or transferred or, processed incorrectly, there is inherent value to a threat actor on that, right? Or, an employee trying to take the data over to their next job, right? There's inherent value that it gives them the leg up to advance and possibly help your competitor. And so the data governance and classification and organization is going to be very critical in 2026. And so when we're talking about, again, kind of the theme of the podcast is leveling up your cybersecurity, is there's many organizations that do not have a grip on the data that they have, right? They have typically hoarded data for, we'll call it 30 years, right? And it's been just sitting on a big file share. So going back to litigation, is that data could be subject to some type of litigation or e-discovery if it's not purged, right? And so measuring what the actual required timeline for sustaining your business while purging unnecessary info is pretty critical. And then I think privacy, is going to be a big contention point, is how are you processing my data? And so what that looks like, I'm sure will advance.
Yeah, holistically, it's interesting. I mean, the frameworks are in place. So if you look at the EU as an example, where they've got all the regulations, and those are in place. And most of the big corporations, your Microsofts, your Metas, and so forth, they're already complying with those regulations. In the US, it's a bit different. I don't know, just kind of harkening back to 2025, I almost said six. There was a bill that was tried to put in place that limits the ability for legislation to come over the top of AI in the US. And that got it nixed. So it was supported in the House of Representatives, but the Senate removed it. But back in mid-December, there was an executive order that came through and says it's illegal for the states to put any kind of additional regulations over it. So just kind of what that means is, if you look at the cybersecurity regulations, there's GDPR in the EU. California's got theirs, Maryland has theirs, and so forth. So there is very specific state regulations that are in place for cybersecurity. Those don't extend throughout the entire US. And what the current administration is trying to do is, they say those regulations are keeping AI from advancing at the rate that it needs to. I would particularly argue that because there is regulations that those big corporations are trying to do business in other countries, they're there, right? The guiding rails exists. And so while it's interesting that the US is saying it's slowing us down, keep going, there are components of it that absolutely will come into play. So the thing that I was referring to with, how do you use AI to manipulate photos? There is something in there, by the way, that you can't use it to mess with the elections. But beyond that, some of that stuff will come. It just will. So the unexpected things that we didn't see coming, when it starts to be weaponized, there will be regulations on them. And I would be stunned if they don't happen in 2026. Overarching, I think they'll try to limit as much regulation as possible, but there will be some that absolutely has to get put in place this year.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to watch some of these AI companies, and, they're putting their own, like when we talk about Adobe, I know Adobe is putting their own personal guardrails before the legislation is even there. So those are kind of smart moves that I've already seen for a different podcast though. But so we talked a little bit about identity. We didn't dive deep into ZTNA, but we obviously have a million podcasts on that. Beyond the obvious, implementing MFA, doing your phishing tests, all the things that we talk about in Cybersecurity Awareness Month that we will definitely be hounding you throughout the entire year. What are some low-hanging fruit you think people should prioritize this year?
So I was gonna make a note that says we absolutely need to end here, but I want to throw one thing in prior to getting to that. Is one of the things I think is going to be this emerging risk that Nate was referring to, is It's there. He said it, but I just want to be implicitly clear about what it is, as we'll refer to it as shadow AI. I've mentioned it in other podcasts, but Adobe is a great example. Every tool, and I shouldn't say every, but I would guess it's well over 95% of tools that are inside an organization has some AI component built into it. 2 years ago, everybody was going absolutely ham trying to build AI into everything. So that's true. Defenders, IT organizations, they just don't have the insights of all the AI that's going on out there. And so I feel like it's a critical piece that organizations need to be able to detect what that looks like and how it's moving through organizations. Microsoft is working on it, but Microsoft's solution limits its visibility to Microsoft tools. I would be stunned if they don't figure that out longer term, which, just to kind of give you an insight what that looks like, is there inevitably will be some sort of agent that goes on a PC that allows you to detect all of the AI that's going on. If you got a network monitoring tool, you probably have some additional insight. So there are things out there that do protect it and have the ability to, or at least give you some insights and visibility to it. I think it's absolutely critical to start planning for that if you don't have it. Is it the easy or probably not? So I wouldn't call it quite low-hanging fruit, but it absolutely should be on your radar. Is what am I doing about this, and how do I start to plan around it?
Yeah, so, since Todd talked on the AI, I'll probably touch on endpoint security. And so the reason why is I just want to go back to cybersecurity is about the basics, right? And it's the fundamentals that people often fail to do that lead to bigger issues. So again, we beat the the horse about remove the VPN, right? ZTNA, right? That's just kind of one component of that. But on the endpoints themselves as well is typically, like I still see organizations that just say, it's too much work to deal with the firewall. So I just turn off the firewall. And what that means is let's just allow anything into our workstations, which means that if a threat actor does get into the network somehow, they have full reign to do whatever they want in that environment, right? Things like removing local admin. I still talk to organizations that say, I use local admin on my machines because this one piece of software requires it. Or my favorite question is asking the IT admins, do you use your admin credential to do IT support on a workstation? Because that is the single most dangerous thing that you can do because your admin, password hash is all stored on there, and all I have to do is take it and send it off to the server, and I log right in. I don't even have to crack the password. Looking at the endpoint security, putting in some type of application whitelisting, allow listing solution. Most of our customers already have this today, but if you're one that doesn't, or you're listening to this podcast, put that in play. We are a partner of ThreatLocker, so it's a solution that we believe strongly in. You can do this with other things like AppLocker, WDAC. It's a pain in the, but taking a look at that. But then going further is taking a look at the actual inbound connections to your systems. You will find on your workstations, there's almost nothing that's required to come in. And so you can quickly secure the lateral movement within that environment by just locking down your workstations. You can go implement this on the servers as well. It's a bit more work, but then there's other just general hardening. If you're up in Intune, look at the security baseline policies. It's all free. It's already built in, right? They have like 200 recommended and pre-built policies to start hardening the environment. Just apply it. And I feel like that's really where a lot of organizations still are not blocking and tackling the basics.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. As we go through these podcasts, I feel like we're building on it. So we've built our foundation. We continue to build up. But I'll tell you, from my perspective as a public speaker, the ones that people show up for the most are the ones where we go through cybersecurity one-on-one, which to me, we've been working on this for so long that to me, I'm like, what, doesn't everybody know this? And the answer is no, they don't. So the only thing that I would throw on top of what Nate said is the basics are absolutely there. If you haven't heard us speak before, go back in the podcast. There's stuff in there that we call the absolute must-have or the non-negotiables. You got to start there. It's your cybersecurity training, it's your EDR, it's the stuff that Nate's talking about, and then slowly build up. I was going to throw segmentation in there, and Nate kind of started touching on it from an application segmentation. So again, depending on where an organization is, would dictate what the next low-hanging fruit would be. But there are the non-negotiables that I just kind of briefly touched on. And I do believe education still is high, especially with the evolution of AI, that the education needs to be way up there. Of what are the guardrails? How do I know what I'm supposed to be doing and what is acceptable? We've done that at CIT, as we said, here's how we expect you to behave. Here's examples of what that looks like. If you haven't done it, you should get it in place. But then when it comes to network segmentation, I would think that would be a big deal too. In case anybody isn't aware, Windows 10 is now end of life. There is no further going. There is unique extended support, but you have to pay for it. However, they're in the manufacturing organizations. There are companies out there that are still running Windows 10 or even older tool sets. And the way that you secure them is segmenting them off from the other portions of your network. So that would be another one that I would have on the radar too. But in the end, everybody's got to have a plan. And the way that you build your plan is you do an assessment. Where am I at today? So once I figure out where my holes are, then I can decide what's next. But we've got tons of podcasts on how we think you get there from the starting point.
Maybe that's a great another 101 right there is what we call gap assessments is where am I versus where I expect or want to be, right? And then you can start to build those plans. So if you don't know where the plan is, that would be a great step.
Yeah, I like that.
I love it. That's great. That feels like we could go further, but it feels like such a great place to end is just that reminder of the basics and the assessment and how important that will be every year, no matter how much things change. So, yeah. Thanks so much, Todd and Nate, for joining us today.
Thanks for listening. If you liked today's episode, share your thoughts with us, subscribe, or reach out at info@citsolutions.net. For more, visit citsolutions.net/podcast. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode.